On everyone, welcome back to my channel, JenksTCG. Today we're going to be sitting down with the Players Cup champion, Jack Millar. He played Lucario Melmetal-GX to the Players Cup finals, that top 16 bracket, and ended up being the #1 spot over everyone else. So before we hop into the interview, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let's go ahead and check out the deck list. Here is Jack's deck list that he played. This is also the same 60 that Matthew Burris played. They both got that cool travel award and played the same 60. As you can see, we got the Bronzong line, so that fire Pokemon can't touch the Bronzong. We got Lucario Melmetal for that GX attack, gonna remove energies and reduce damage done to a metal Pokemon. We got 4 copies of Zacian V, 2 Zamazenta V to block those VMAXs. And overall, it's pretty interesting. There's no extra draw supporters, and as Jack will probably mention in the interview, you don't want those bench sitters on the bench for ADP to go ahead and gust up. So overall, a really well-crafted list, super straightforward. And then you got the Tag Call engine, 3 Tag Calls, 2 Mallow Lanas, just 1 copy of Caitlin Cynthia. And another thing that's really big is the 4 Metal Goggles. So overall, a really cool counter deck to that Players Cup meta that we ended up seeing. If you haven't seen any of that, go ahead and go on the Play Pokemon YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, whatever. Go ahead and watch those matches. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the interview, and let's get right into it. Yo, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to my channel, JenksTCG. Today I am joined with Jack Millar of Australia, the Players Cup champion from down under. How's it going, man? How long? And yeah, how was the weekend?
It's pretty good. The weekend was so-so because we had to stay up super late to play the tournament, but aside from that, it was fine.
Yeah, for sure. And go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and how long you've been playing.
I'm Jack. I'm from Brisbane in Australia. I've been playing since like 2013, but I only really started traveling about 2 years ago. Outside of Pokemon, I guess. I'm a psychology student. That's about it.
That's awesome. And what are some of the accomplishments you've had in the game? Obviously, you've had a lot of recent success. Tell us about those.
So I guess accomplishments. I got top 32 at Worlds 2 years ago with this Buzzgarb deck that a bunch of the other Australians played. I also I did pretty well in Q2 this year with a Mewtwo deck that had a bunch of tag calls in it. My deck was pretty good.
Yeah. All right, so then obviously you are the Players Cup champion. How did you end up qualifying through the finals? Obviously, we had the qualifying rounds with the 4 different regions, and then there were only 3 spots for the Oceania region. What did you do to get there?
All right, so in terms of like the ticket thing, I know that was pretty controversial, but in Oceania, it was like, wasn't much of a problem because I think 128th had something like 8 tournament rep. So you basically just needed to win 1 tournament to make it in. But for like the top 128 bracket, Matthew Burris, who's the player who got second at this with the same deck I played, he ended up spreading this Pikarom deck to like 10 Australian players or something. He just said, oh, this list is pretty good, put it in like 2 different group chats, told everybody to play the deck. And like, I think almost 10% of the field was this exact list that we all played. And the bracket was pretty simple. I had some no-shows early on, but just went 6-0.
Yeah, so obviously a nice 6-0 qualification, and then I remember Burris talking about that Pikarom list. It was crazy about how many people were playing the deck. So obviously, job well done getting to that stage. And then going into this Players Cup, we know that it's a post-rotation format, a new format. We didn't have a ton of time to prepare. What did you end up doing to prepare?
All right, so we started playing basically as soon as we knew what the format was because we didn't really have much else to do. We were like playing on Untapped for a while, and we just built a bunch of the decks and just started making lists. Initially, we thought Eternatus was going to be the strongest deck because it just had all the big numbers on it and seemed pretty good. And that deck ended up being pretty okay. I think it kind of underperformed at the event, but it also had a massive target on its head because of how strong it was. Yeah. So we were liking the deck initially, but it felt very abusable, I guess. And you can kind of see one of the ways it could get abused with the deck we played. So we were kind of just losing faith in Eternatus slowly because the deck was just, I guess it was pretty weird. It felt strong, but it also felt like it was going to be targeted. So we really didn't want to bring a deck like that, especially to a really small field. I don't know, at something like an Icy, it's very different because you just play against players you don't really put that much effort in.
Yeah.
And just play really standard decks. But again, in this field, we really didn't want to take a risk like that. So we started looking more towards just some different directions, made some weird decks. And then eventually Matt sent me this random list that had just a bunch of metal Pokemon in it. It had like this Bronzong. I didn't even know what the Bronzong did at the time. We had like, it had all these like no Dedenne, a bunch of supporters in it, and like 14 metal energy or something. Then we just started playing it in deck. The deck just beat Eternatus almost every single time. The matchup just felt impossible.
Yeah.
From the Eternatus player. The Bronzong was a very good way of dealing with Centiskorch, but I guess I'll go back to that later. That matchup might not be as easy as we thought.
Yeah.
The ADP Zacian matchup was, I think, favored as long as they didn't play any defensive tools, because your Zacians one-hit KO their Zacians, but their Zacians don't one-hit KO your Zacians. So you just end up winning that trade eventually. And those were the main three decks we wanted to try and beat. And those were like the vast majority of the event, so it pretty much worked out.
Yeah, so I think the deck you brought is a very good like definition of a counter deck, and there's a lot of key cards in there that would help with that. Like you said, the Zazamentas and the Bronzong, and then you had the Tag Call engine to go ahead and find the Lucario Melmetal, and overall, and no support Pokemon too, which is obviously super helpful for playing against ADP. So now you have this cool deck list, and you ended up playing same 60 with Matt, right?
Yeah.
So you played same 60 Lucario Melmetal with Matt. Go ahead and tell us about your rounds. How did it go? And obviously you were crowned champion, so go ahead.
All right. So the first round I played against Decidueye Obstagoon, which wasn't a deck we were intentionally trying to counter, but ended up just being a deck we completely hard countered with Bronzong. Because after Full Metal Wall and Metal Goggles, that Decidueye takes a 5-hit knockout on your Bronzong. And you take a 2-hit knockout on them and you confuse them.
Yeah.
And you also have cards like Mallow Lana, which reset 4 attacks. So the matchup basically just turns into a disaster for Decidueye. They just can't do anything to beat you. And yeah, I had a bit of a scare in game 2 of the first round because my opening hand had 2 Bronzong and a Research and nothing else. So it was like, I had to just kind of sit there and pass with my Melmetal in the active, just like, can I draw a Communication, please? Or like a Marnie. And then I think eventually I drew out of it, got a Bronzong in play, and then the game was just over.
Yeah.
And so the next round, this one was actually streamed, I think. It was against Eternatus, and kind of same deal. Game 1 went like perfectly. He missed attachment. I got the Full Metal Wall. And then I got a Zamazenta set up with 3 energy and a Goggles before he was even attacking me. And if you can get set up that quickly, the matchup is just like impossible for them. All my turns were just, I draw, I click Assault Tackle.
Yeah.
And I didn't really need to do much else to win the first game. So the second game, all right, so for context in the second game, about the night before, we had to submit our deck lists. We made a change. We cut the 3rd Zamazenta for a tag call. And so the reason why we had 3 Zamazenta is because there's a scenario against Eternatus where you can lose, which is where you start Bronzor and you have a bad hand, so you have to use Zacian for Intrepid Sword, because the main way this deck actually draws out of bad hands is Intrepid, because you just get a lot of turns, so you have a lot of cards in that way. And so because of that, you couldn't Full Metal Wall. And so the other thing that had to happen is you had to prize your second Zamazenta, and then they could poison you with Crobat, and eventually your Zamazenta would get knocked out and you would lose.
Yeah.
So that's why we played 3 Zamazenta to basically prevent that outcome, but we kind of thought the deck needed more consistency, so we cut the Zama, and we just thought, okay, what are the odds of this scenario actually happening? And that's exactly what happened. I started Bronzor, and I prized the second Zamazenta, and my opening hand was bad.
Oh, God.
But my opponent just didn't attack with Crobat, so it was fine.
Yeah.
and they just let me take some prizes early, and I unprized the second Zama. So once that card got down, the matchup was just over.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I don't even think it would have been that much of a disaster if I lost, because I still had game 3, and that would have to happen again, and the odds of that are just way too low.
Yeah.
And then the next round, I was against Todd's Inteleon deck. I was pretty scared going in because I barely knew what his cards did. Like, Inteleon is not something you really expect to play against at this event, but I was worried that he could pull off some stuff, especially with Lapras V. This was where I think the open deck lists were very, very important to this deck doing well, because I was able to see his Lapras V. That's not a card I would have expected to play against otherwise. So just seeing the Lapras V kind of told me that I should have a Zacian in the back to deal with the Lapras. And so that's kind of just how I played the game. Not without knowing about Lapras, I would have just powered up 2 Zamas, but knowing about Lapras, I had to power up the Zacian, and that just made the game way easier because Tor's deck lost a lot of its surprise value.
Yeah.
And so I was just able to do that. Turns out his deck just doesn't have enough damage output. Like, if I'm able to knock out his Lapras the turn it attacks, he has to 3-hit KO my Zamazenta, which is just a disaster. And turns out our deck would just outrace his, and he would lose, I guess.
And that's obviously a good feeling, having such a good matchup in game plan against Tord. And I know it was just crazy to see the Inteleon, so I'm pretty sure you were quite happy about being able to beat that.
Yeah, it was. Turns out the matchup was a lot easier than I expected, thankfully.
Yeah. And then going into round 4, what did that look like?
Well, I was playing against Matt.
Yeah.
So at this point, we were both pretty happy because we both had the travel award.
Yep.
So we were just chilling, playing the mirror. There was a lot of you had a good decks thrown around. But it turns out the mirror was way more tempo based than I expected. It depends a lot on how much energy you get off your Intrepid Swords, because you need to be the one attacking your opponent's Zacians first. And it's also a lot about just finding a way to switch your Zacians, because nothing gets 1-hit carried in the mirror.
Yeah. And
the only Pokemon that get 2-hit carried are other Zacians. So it's just a very weird game. But it's, it was surprisingly fast. We both played pretty quickly as well. A note about this deck is that this deck is not very difficult to play.
Yeah.
Like, once the deck's built, all your matchups are pretty simple. And so I guess my Intrepid Swords were just better than his, and I won the first mirror. And so that was the first night of the event done.
And then going into Sunday, you ended up staying in the grand finals. And I'm not 100% sure how that bracketing system works, but I'm assuming you had to wait out for the losers bracket to play out?
Yeah, I had to wait for like 3 individual rounds to finish, I think. And like, the call time for us is 11 p.m, so that was a bit...
Yeah.
That was a bit miserable, but it was fine. And then when I saw Matt beat Victor Freitas in the losers final, it was just hilarious, the fact that this deck hadn't taken a single loss.
Yeah.
We were honestly kind of in disbelief. Like, we thought the deck would either like succeed or it would just be a massive failure. No, there was no in between. So I'm pretty glad it worked out.
Yeah, and then I would imagine the grand finals, another similar to the round 4, just you got better Intrepid Swords than Matt.
Yeah, I was certainly the more skilled player. My Intrepid Swords hit more energy. I drew my boss's orders earlier than he did.
Yeah.
And that was the finals.
That's interesting, and definitely, especially because the people, when this is uploaded, will see it on stream. And it's really cool that a counter deck like yours was able to just come out of it. And like you said, if people had not played the decks you were expecting, it would have gone completely different. And then the Senna Scorch not realizing they're out is a little fortunate as well.
There is a very specific out for Senti Scorch. Do you want me to explain it?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So after the tournament, we figured out that the matchup is actually very losable. So, all right, so in that matchup, if they play Eldegoss, you have to full Metal Wall. And if you don't full Metal Wall, they can just Eldegoss loop you and knock out your Bronzongs, and eventually you'll lose. So you have to use full Metal Wall, and that's 3 prizes they take. And if your hand is bad, or if you start a 2-prizer, which is very likely, they'll take 2 prizes. So you have 1 Bronzong left on the field. And if they can just continuously loop the Senti-Scorch first attack, eventually you'll just run out of metal energy. And if they have 2 fire energy left, they'll be able to infinitely loop Eldegoss and deck you out. So it's kind of a specific win condition, but it's definitely something we overlooked pretty heavily.
Yeah. And then, of course...
Sorry?
Go ahead.
Yeah. If you play a Brock's Grit, you basically beat that. There's also a bunch of other stuff where if you hold your full Metal Wall and go like switch and play a bunch of Metal Sources at once, you can beat it. But it definitely makes the matchup more interesting than we thought it would be.
I think now that this information's out there, Senti-Scorch will probably have a better time playing against your deck, and maybe the decks will have to be built a little bit differently. But obviously, you, after playing the double mirror match and then auto-winning your way into the finals, you won the event and are the first, or maybe many, Players Cup champions. What were your thoughts on how the event was ran, all the way from the qualifiers to winning? And it was a pretty controversial topic. Was there anything that you would have improved or anything like that?
To be honest, I know a lot of people had a lot of problems with the ticket system, but I'm not sure what else they could have done. Like, that, honestly, that's like the only gripe I have with the event. All the Battlefly tournaments were ran really smoothly. Everything was done on time. Like, I think the event in general was ran super well, aside from like the ticket controversy. But I don't know what else they could do in that situation. Like, you can't just make it open tournaments if they wanted to make it double elim, because that just doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
So the tickets were basically all they could do. And it turns out it wasn't too much of a problem because the requirements in each region were so low, I think. I don't know what they were in America, but they were like, you needed to win 2 or 3 tournaments and you'd get in.
Yeah.
So it was pretty easy to grind up tickets during that month and qualify.
And yeah, I agree with you. Overall, the tournaments that we participated in, especially the qualifiers and the day 2, everything was completely ran fine on Battlefly. But yeah, that's going to be it for today. So I want to congratulate you one more time on your amazing run and winning the event. And, you know, obviously going to go down in the books of the kind of quarantine champion, Jack Millar. So go ahead and feel free to shout out any of your social medias or the people that helped you get to where you are. The floor is yours.
All right. The first shout out is obviously to Matt. He is the original creator of the deck. He also named the deck, actually. He named it the Safe.
The Safe?
And Matt is like the person who will put so much thought into this stuff. He named it the Safe because it's made of metal, it's impenetrable, and if you have the combination, it's useless. So it's like, it's the perfect name for the deck, I think.
Yeah.
And just making the deck, practicing with it, and sort of practicing a lot. I guess Matt is like a huge shout out I have to give. And I guess my Twitter, it's at MacGillaTCG. I don't know, I don't use it much, so I guess that's the.
All right. Well, thank you for being here, and have a good one.
Thanks. You too.